Hey, Kerry.
Hey, Counselor, how's it going?
Good, Kerry. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So I'm going to probably start right at 11 o'clock. If I sent out a text to my colleagues.
Sounds good. I'm just waiting for confirmation from Docket that we're live on the site, but we should get that any moment now, so we'll be good to go.
Hi, Counselor Flynn and Carrie. I just wanted to let you know I'm here, okay?
Good morning, Counselor.
Good morning.
Okay. Thank you, Julia.
But I can't see anything. I just see screen sharing.
Yeah, same with me. I can't, all I can see is the,
Flynn, I can't see you, Flynn, just so you know.
yeah, okay.
You gotta clean your lens too. It looks dirty.
Okay. Okay, no, thanks for telling me that. Hey, Kerry, can you see if you could change my screen so I can see everybody?
There you go. Whoa, hello, everybody. Flynn, but your screen is still dirty.
I lost everybody, so I'm going to try and come in again, I guess.
Glenn, you're in. That's fine.
Okay.
Yep. And Councilor Flynn, I think what Councilor Mayor is saying, you may have a piece of paper or something covering the camera lens on your laptop or something. There you go. Yep, whatever. I think it might be
Maybe
just
actually not want to
tilted
be
down.
on camera today, perhaps.
Maybe you're not camera ready, Flynn. Is that what it is? Okay.
I'm going to let you councilors discuss this one, and I'll just step aside.
So, Counselor Flynn, I got confirmation from Docket that we're live on the web, so we're ready to go when you are.
Okay.
Councilor Flynn, I'm logged in. I just have to step away for 5 minutes, but I'll be back shortly. And we still can't see you.
Okay, I'm having problems with my screen, so I'll try to get back to it. Good morning, everybody. This is Boston City Councilor Ed Flynn, Chair of the City and Neighborhood Services Committee. Today, we are having a hearing on docket 0890, order for a hearing to discuss digital equity and internet access. The hearing was sponsored by myself, Councilor Mejia, and Councilor Flaherty. I am joined by several of my colleagues today, including City Councilor Liz Braden, City Councilor Mejia, City Councilor Anissa Asabi George, City Councilor Kenzie Bach, and that's all I have right now. When other councilors do come, I will be certain to mention them. This hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/citycouncil/TV. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. The Zoom link to provide public testimony for this hearing can be found by emailing juan.lopez@boston.gov. Please make sure that your Zoom handle is your full name. When you are called, please state your name, affiliation, residence, and limit your comments to 2 minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. If you are unable to provide testimony today, you may submit written testimony or a 2-minute video for our record by emailing the committee at ccc.cns@boston.gov or filling out the form on our website within 48 hours following the hearing. I will first let the sponsors of the hearing offer brief remarks, then hand it over to the panelists. After that, I will let my colleagues offer questions and comments, then call for public testimony. Maybe I'll try to include my colleagues right at the beginning since there's just a few of us. Councilor Mejia, would you like to provide opening statements?
Sure. Seeing that I am one of your co-sponsor, I would love to. Councillor Flynn, thank you so much for bringing us together and for leading this initiative in regards to internet access. And I'm proud to join you and Councillor Flaherty on this hearing order. We are really excited because in our office, this really sets the core values of who we are and why we even exist, namely around civic engagement and civil rights. So much is changing when it comes to how we use technology. With education and socialization being pushed online because of COVID-19, the inequity of our digital divide, especially as it relates to Black and Brown communities, has been getting worse. While BPS reported that only 5% lacked access to the internet, let's be clear that 5% is still over 2,700 young people who are sitting at home right now with no access to the internet. And one is too many. And this is the issue for me, isn't just personal or professional. We've had to completely restart our council meetings because my bootleg internet kicks me out and won't let me rejoin. We have an opportunity to reimagine how we engage communities. It's perhaps one of the only highlights of the COVID pandemic, but we need to do so in ways that undo the barriers set in place for decades of systemic inequities. And I look forward to hearing this and to the action items that will come from it. We've heard from so many parents across the city of Boston are now working from home while their children are also learning from home. And this is creating additional barriers in terms of access. There are some people who have no internet whatsoever, and I'm looking forward to really diving into this issue. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn, and now I can see you. So.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. The other co-sponsor is Councilor Flaherty. I know Councilor Flaherty has joined us. Councilor Flaherty, would you like to give opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and co-sponsor Councilor Flynn for hosting this hearing, as well as to my colleague Councilor Mejia as well for co-sponsoring this hearing with me. And as you and Councilor Mejia just mentioned, access to quality internet service and to technology is critically important during this time, not only to our schools that are online at the moment, but to many opportunities that exist for employment, higher education, and civic engagement are all online as well. So I'm interested in hearing more about the work of the Digital Equity Fund and what our city partners are working on as well. We also want to hear from other panelists about what they've learned from their work and other best practices in other cities and towns. And hopefully we can bring it to Boston if it doesn't already exist. So we got obviously an esteemed list of panelists, and they know this stuff better than anybody. So I'm looking forward to listening to what they have to say and have questions at the end of their presentation. So thank you, Chairman Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Next up is Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I really welcome this hearing because internet access is the equivalent of access to electricity 100 years ago. It is such a determinant of our ability to access education in this moment, but also it is a necessary infrastructure for small businesses to do their business online. It is a necessary infrastructure to help adult learning and all sorts of other applications. And it really is important that all of our communities across the city have access to internet, just as we would expect them to have access to electricity. Access to broadband internet is essential to modern life in the city of Boston. So I welcome this hearing and I look forward to hearing the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Next up, I believe, is City Councilor Anissa Asabi George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here today. A special thanks, obviously, to the makers for bringing this before us. I just want to echo the sort of sentiments and interests of my colleagues, and for the interest of time and to get to it, because we've got a lot of good participants here today. I'm going to end my remarks there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kenzie Bok.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I too will just echo everyone and say this is such an important issue. I really agree with Councillor Braden that it's a core utility, and I regret the fact that I think our federal laws and just the whole way we approach this infrastructure hasn't caught up with that yet. So I think the more that we as a city of Boston can be extending the type of things we've been doing with fiber in municipal buildings, with wicked-free Wi-Fi, to really think about this as essential for all of our residents, and as something that creates so much value, right? Whenever you give people access to information, to online community, I mean, you're creating the conditions for a world that you can't even imagine, that they then have the ability to bring into being. So I think equity on this front is essential, and like many people are very concerned about the way that the inequity across our city is impacting our BPS students right now. But I think really impacting everyone also from a work from home side. And so really grateful to the maker for this urgent hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bok. Councilor Wu is next. Councilor Wu?
Oh, I'm so sorry. My my internet cut out for a second.
Okay.
I thought you might have said me, but I wasn't sure. I just want to echo everything that's been said. Our digital infrastructure is just as important an investment right now as any other bit of infrastructure to be plugged in for economic and educational and civic and social purposes, as said before. So we're living this daily. I'm really grateful to the sponsors for making sure this is a priority in the council's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. I'm going to go right to the city panelists, city and city partner panelists that are present with us today. The updated panel list I have on the administration side will be David Elge, Chief Information Officer, DeWitt; Alex Lawrence, Chief of Staff, DeWitt; Mike Lynch, Broadband and Cable Director at DeWitt; Glenn Williams, who's the General Manager of Boston Neighborhood Network Media; and Dan Noyes from Tech Goes Home. I'm not sure if Dan is on here. Okay, hi Dan, I see you.
Sorry, Councilor Flynn, I just wanted to make sure that Lorena Luperon from the Executive Director of Massachusetts Latinos for Education will be joining us, and Akeem Jackson from Up Academy Network. Did I miss those two?
No, you didn't miss them. They're going to be on the second panel. So the community advocates on the second panel will be Akeem Jackson, Senior Director of Family Engagement, and Pam Edinger, who's the President of Bunker Hill Community College; Lorena Lapora, Executive Director, Massachusetts Latinos for Education; and Deborah Bacchus, Executive Director, Castle Square Tenants Organization, and out of the South End. We're also taking public testimony as well. But maybe we can try to start with the city administration. Wasn't sure who would like to take the lead, but feel free to give an opening statement.
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn, for putting this docket together and putting this forward. This is very important work. And obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has really kind of pushed that onto the forefront. And as cities around the country really struggle with not only technology, but access and then the digital skills to use both technology and the access. And I agree, it's very much like a utility as we start to go into our new reality of how we work and how we socialize and how we live our lives. So this is very important work, and I'd like to highlight, and I believe that it was mentioned earlier, the good work that we're doing here in the city of Boston. There's always more to do. Unfortunately, some of our federal partners down in DC have not quite stepped up to the challenge that a lot of municipal governments are dealing with right now. So, I mean, at this point, I could hand it over to Mike Lynch, who's really kind of running point for Do It on this work, on everything having to do with digital equity and broadband and cable and whatnot. So with that, I could hand it over to Mike Lynch for a statement.
That's perfect. Thank you, David, and glad to have you, David, and glad to have you, Mike, as well.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm just going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully we'll be all set. And of course, the panel blocks my access to the share, but give me 1 second and I'll present. All right, I'm having a little trouble getting the share on because I'm blocked, but at a brief, thank you. There we go. I apologize. This is just really a highlight. I think it didn't escape our notice and Do It that virtually every city councilor has signed on to this order. So we are preaching a little bit to the converted. And I heard one of the councilors mention how the internet is really something that we all must have. And it reminded me of the last slide of my deck here, where the former Federal Communications Chair, Tom Wheeler, noted just recently that the internet is no longer nice to have. It is critical. What Chairman Wheeler did not say is that as a former head of the Wireless Association and the Telecom Association and the FCC, he had many opportunities to make this sort of a utility or something that everybody had a right to. Unfortunately, that federal partnership, that support from the FCC has never come forward, and it's left to cities and towns like Boston to solve these problems now. I think everyone on the council is very familiar with what has happened to date in the work that we have done with your support. We have many things now that we're in the middle of. I mentioned just a few of them here as highlights. I won't really go through them a little bit on the workers. However, a lot of skills training was required on the front end here to make sure that everybody was able to do their job remotely and effectively during COVID. It was very challenging. Everyone jumped in with both feet. It was really impressive to see. I've heard the councilors already note this, and I don't want to have to reiterate it if we can save some time, but there has been a tremendous investment in the city targeting people who are not served and who lack connectivity. These are just some of the highlights here. I think everyone remembers what our goal is during the pandemic, and we tried to adopt that when it came to digital equity. I noticed in the order there was some discussion of our providers. I've shared this slide with some other people, and it's true. I kind of hate to say it publicly, but Comcast, RCN, and Verizon have been doing a great job. We don't like to advertise that fact. We always like to tell them they can do more. But we in Boston are very fortunate to have 3 cable-based broadband providers and an additional 3 major wireless providers who can provide connectivity to pretty much every street in the city. That doesn't mean that every home is connected. That doesn't mean that everyone can afford that connectivity, but the resources are there. This is just a highlight of the unique deliveries from some of our partners. I understand that Comcast has provided a fact sheet, if you will, with much of their contribution this morning. I'll leave it to the councilors to review that. RCN is a smaller company, similar to Comcast, and they have during this pandemic endeavored to match contributions by the other parties. I'd like to throw this up. This comes from the National Digital Inclusion Association, and it is a definition of digital equity. It's nice to know that we all have the same view. I think I heard one of the counselors in the introductory remarks talk about a second issue, which is digital inclusion. That also includes something called, I guess you'd refer to it as a generic help desk for people who need support and a helping hand as we go through this. During COVID, we have found that to be critical because prior to last spring, we in the city were able to provide courses and trainings through either Tech Goes Home or the Timothy Smith Network, both city-funded organizations. And folks were able to go to a workshop, share notes, comparisons, get a guiding hand on what they were doing. In a COVID world, that's no longer possible. You really don't have that one-on-one connection. So it makes delivery of training and education that much more challenging. I suspect that Tech Goes Home will want to discuss that later. One thing that has happened over the last 6 months is that 3 departments, Age Strong, Boston Housing Authority, and Boston Public Schools, have surveyed their clients, their students, their residents, in order to get a true assessment of the needs that are out there. I particularly like Age Strong because they tried to sort of go beyond what is your immediate challenge and identify what other challenges. I think most of the counselors know as you talk to your constituents, the lack of connectivity that people have, they actually have a hard time identifying what the problem is because it's a complicated world and it's our job to make it easier for them. The same is true of the schools. We spent quite a bit of time in August surveying their student families. And the Housing Authority has done the same with its residents. I like to show this slide because if you look at that national number, 1/3 of adults never use the internet. That didn't seem surprising prior to COVID pandemic, but as we see now, everyone should be. And if they aren't, they're missing the one avenue of social sort of interaction that they desperately need. So it's the isolated seniors are certainly a big target for Age Strong and for the Boston Housing Authority. Again, I don't want to take up too much time. The slide sort of speaks for itself, if you will. But this is the beginning of kind of a new concept. Prior to this spring, the concept of a city like Boston providing services to residents at home in order for them to connect to other services that we provide was something of a foreign and unknown concept. There was no mechanism for a city government, a county government, or a town government to buy internet services so that someone at home could have access to education, counseling, support systems, transactions with city government, all of the things that our seniors, our new immigrants, and our students need. That changed completely about 6 months ago when Comcast introduced a program called Internet Essentials and others followed. This program allows for local government to purchase for approximately $10 a month, $120 a year, service in people's home for the benefit of keeping them engaged civically and through their schools. Recently, timing Councilor Flynn on this hearing is absolutely perfect, I have to say, because just last week, 2 things happened that were something of milestones for us. One was the state opened up a state blanket contract, that is a procurement tool, in order to allow cities and towns like Boston to purchase these services from Comcast in bulk in order to serve our city school children who are in need. In addition to that, our funding through Tech Goes Home, which the council supported last spring, has been finalized in order to deliver those services along with training, support, and a device to as many as 1,500 school families, elderly who are in isolation, new immigrants who need to access training for ESOL and other programs, and Boston housing residents. Finally, there was a state, I think I have a slide up here, but there was a state contract as well, State Department of Education contract, which the school department won just recently. And we anticipate that that contract will purchase another 2,000 subscriptions to Internet Essentials for Boston school children. We hope that combined, all of these things will be of great benefit to the citizens of Boston. I'm sure there's more to be done. But we've had a pretty good year this year, probably trebling our support from prior years. That's my brief statement. I'm happy to defer to you, Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Let's go right to Glenn Williams, who's with us. Glenn?
Yes, good morning, Councilor. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's truly always a pleasure and quite an honor to be involved in these discussions. My name is Glenn Williams. I'm the General Manager of Boston Neighborhood Network. We are the PEG access station here in Boston that I'm sure a bunch of you know. We are also a Timothy Smith Network lab. We have been since 2001, but we have 14 computers here that are accessible to members. Now, we've made it so that the membership is very, very affordable for people with limited income, retirees, and whatnot. It's $42.50 a year for unlimited use to these computers. And it also gives them access to the classes and everything else that goes along with being a member here at Boston Neighborhood Network. But the Timothy Smith Network computers are some people's only line to the internet, because this is the place they have to come to kind of get online. And that's what we do. We're also partnering this year with Tech Goes Home. We're doing a distance learning workshop for parents of Boston Public School students, where the parents help them navigate the Google Classroom and communicate with teachers, enables participation to effectively use popular applications and internet services. It's a way for us to help with our partnership with the Boston Public Schools. They also, as I think Michael mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they also end up with a Chromebook and assistance in signing up with for low-cost internet access. We feel that that's an important aspect. We've been a partner with the Boston Public Schools since March 15th, and what we've been doing is providing classes that are shown on the stations. We've dedicated 9 o'clock in the morning till noon, and from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 4 to Boston Public School classes. So the teachers can also reach kids that, if they're on the internet in their house and their little brother gets on the phone, they get knocked out of the classroom, you know, so they can at least get these things from their basic cable subscriptions. We're also having classes. One of the things we're doing with the Boston Public Schools this year is we're expanding all of that kind of thing. And we're also coming back with the Good Night Scholars, so that the kids can get some bedtime stories. I am reaching out now to all city councilors to participate in that. If you haven't, it's a great groovy thing. You'll really dig it. We're also supplying Zoom classes for anybody that wants to take classes and learn how to use Zoom. If they need to do programming, or if they're putting radio programming together for our stations, they can do that remotely. Another big partnership that's just happened is with BU Wheelock, the College of Education and Human Development. What they're sending us is webinars and live that we can do, where people can call in and ask questions. The one that's running tonight is reopening schools in mental health. And it's an opportunity for parents to be able to kind of tune in on the television and interact with some of the experts. And the next one is going to be what Google search data tells us about inequities in online learning during the pandemic. Boston Neighborhood Network's committed to making sure that what I consider an essential right to everybody, that we find some way to get them access to those imperative, those most valuable assets, and that's access to the internet, get information, be able to sit in on schools. I'm very proud of the people here in the work that they're doing. So that's just a little quick what we're doing, and we're expanding on that as much as we possibly can. Thank you, Councilor. Back to you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for your team. You guys do excellent work, so we appreciate it, Glenn. Next, could I have, well, before I introduce Dan, I wanted to recognize my colleagues that have joined us. I should have done that earlier. Councilor Edwards, Councilor Janey, and Councilor Campbell are with us. If Councilor Edwards, Janey, or Campbell would like to give a very brief opening statement, we can start off with Councilor Edwards.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, Lydia.
Can you
go
see
ahead.
me?
We can hear.
I'm so sorry. Well, I'm outside, so I put my mask back on. But my only general question was about continued access to archived school lessons for kids. Do you have an ongoing online tutorial in more than one language for parents who are still looking for access and being able to learn how to navigate the internet?
Is that a question? Is that a question for BNN? We most certainly do. We have a VOD segment of our business here that allows all of the kids to go back to see VOD, to watch programming over again. We're giving parents access on how to learn how to use the internet along with their new Chromebooks and whatnot. I think that the key to the success of this whole thing is that within 6 or 7 weeks, several of the preschool programs had garnished 450 different video on demands where kids came back to learn and came back to check out those programs. And we have the ability to get the analytics to find out whether it's just a search and a run. And 90% of those programs were watched in their entirety. So we know that they're using the asset. And yes, we do, these classes we're giving are in multiple languages. The Good Night Scholars, we got them in Vietnamese, we've got them in Spanish, we've got them in Haitian, we got them all. We're trying to cover everybody. We want everyone to be happy, and have them enjoy what's out there for them. But thank you. I hope I didn't step in where that's what I had to say. Thanks.
No, thank you, Glenn. That was a great question. And maybe Mike and Dave can answer it when we get to the questions. We'll include that question in there. But is Councilor Janey on with us if she'd like to give a brief opening statement? Councilor Janey? And Councilor Campbell was also here. Councilor Campbell?
Good morning, Councilor Flynn, and thank you to the makers for having a hearing and continuing the conversation on this critical issue. Thank you to all of the panelists in the Do It department working really hard in the midst of a pandemic. This is all new for everyone, so I just want to say thank you. I'm looking forward to listening. Obviously, the digital divide has existed for a long time, and so we have a unique opportunity to work collaboratively to close it for so many families. So I look forward to continuing to be a part of that work, not only in the education space, but every other space, including accessing government services. So thank you again to the makers. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I will give any time to the panelists to continue their presentations.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Campbell. And when Councilor Janey is available, we'll have her for an opening statement. But at this time, Dan from Tech Goes Home. Dan, would you like to give an opening statement?
Yes, good morning. I am honored to be here. My name is Dan Noyes. I'm the co-CEO of Tech Goes Home. I've been with Tech Goes Home for about 10 years. Prior to that, I was at Boston Public Schools for about 10 years. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify at this hearing on internet access and digital equity. I am proud to represent TECO's Home, our instructors, and our learners. For many students, workers, and families in Boston, digital exclusion was a barrier to success long before COVID. The pandemic hasn't created a new problem as much as it has exposed and exacerbated existing digital inequities. Digital exclusion does not exist in a silo. It is directly linked to racial, education, and economic injustice. Despite curricula and school systems that increasingly rely on virtual solutions for communication, direct instruction, and class assignments, thousands of students in Massachusetts and millions across the United States lack access to either an internet connection or device for learning at home. Students of color, Black and Latinx students in particular, are overrepresented among those without access. Boston Schools has done a great job of getting critical resources to the vast majority of families, and they are continuing to work with schools and community organizations such as TECO's Home to reach those still without the resources they need. But we all know it takes more than simply getting Chromebooks and access into the hands of families. The entire family needs training and the skills and support to take advantage of that technology. Applying for, advancing in, and accessing higher paying job opportunities increasingly requires a range of digital skills, from online job forums and job applications to virtual interviews and email capabilities. And yet the data shows that workers of color are overrepresented among those with limited or no digital skills. Of all Black workers, 13% have advanced digital skills, compared to 41% of white workers. Now more than ever, access to healthcare information and telemedicine is critical to the health and safety of communities across this country. And yet 23% of households don't have access to those resources due to a lack of internet connectivity or a home computer. And with the 2020 census being conducted largely online, digital access is critical to ensuring we count every member of our community in order to secure equitable funding for schools, housing, and other community resources. Yet with only days left to fill out the census, only 58% of Boston households have done so, disproportionately impacting, quote, hard to count in historically marginalized communities, including immigrant families, residents of dense urban areas, individuals experiencing homelessness, and individuals with disabilities. Today, access to the internet, digital devices, and the training to utilize those tools, a skill set that we too often take for granted, are critical to receiving an education, pursuing economic opportunity, and accessing and engaging with essential services like healthcare, the census, and community resources. By working in collaboration with nearly 150 community-based partners throughout Boston, TECO's Home provides digital devices, internet access, and skills training to amplify existing work tackling these critical social justice issues. We serve students, teachers, adults, senior citizens, and families throughout Greater Boston from ages 3 to 95. 75% of our learners have household incomes of under $35,000 a year. 30% of our adult learners we work with are unemployed. 85% are people of color, and nearly 50% are immigrants. Last year, we experienced greater demand than ever for our programs and served a record-breaking 5,500 learners, representing 9 different languages. And this year, the pandemic and associated stay-at-home orders have caused demand for our services to skyrocket. COVID has forced us to think differently and challenge long-held assumptions. We moved to an entirely virtual learning environment, developed guides for critical resources such as grocery and prescription delivery and accessing unemployed benefits, and ramped up professional development opportunities for our instructors, focused on how to deliver content virtually as opposed to in person. Further, distance learning has significantly increased our costs, meaning we need to raise more money per household than ever before. Thankfully, the private sector has recently stepped up to the plate, supporting TECO's Home at record levels. And the City of Boston and Mayor Walsh continue to be fundamental champions of our work, building on the city's 20 years of foundational support. We commend Councilors Flynn, Mejia, and Flaherty for calling this hearing, and commend all the members of the City Council who have focused on digital equity in different areas of our city. We urge intentional consideration of how we can build a comprehensive citywide strategy that will tackle this issue with the urgency and social equity lens required to bring racial and economic justice to our communities. Thank you all, and I am more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. We're also joined by City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Matt, do you want to give a very quick opening statement?
Sorry, can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we can.
Oh, no, I'm late to this, but I did want to join, so I'll withhold an opening statement, but thank the panelists and look forward to continuing the work, and thank you and to our colleagues for calling this important hearing.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. I'm going to go right into questions. I'm going to start with Councilor Mejia, but I just wanted to provide my opening statements very briefly, if I may. We filed this hearing order to ensure internet access and digital equity in Boston, as the internet is becoming increasingly indispensable to everyday life, especially during this pandemic. It is critical that we discuss ways to make sure that residents have access to affordable internet services and digital resources. Education, business, work, other services are now increasingly reliant on the internet. And with COVID-19 pandemic, having internet access and knowing how to use digital resources is now a necessity. However, some areas of the city are still currently underserved in terms of internet access and still have a lack of choices in choosing an affordable and reliable internet service provider. Moreover, our working class families, our immigrant communities, communities of color, residents of the Boston Housing Authority, our seniors, are most likely to have issues with lack of internet access and knowledge and digital skills. And we need to ensure that residents have the resources they need to use the internet to participate in work, education, civic life, and to talk to their family members. We're making great progress. So I'm glad to partner with Councilor Mejia, Flaherty on this issue to talk about how we can work together with city officials. This is a critical issue. We want to continue working with civic organizations to expand internet access and digital education for our residents. With that, I want to open it up to questions from my colleagues, starting with Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And thank you to the panelists. I'm really happy to continue the dialogue. So this question is specifically for Mike Lynch. I'm just curious with wicket-free Wi-Fi. And it is very wicked because it's not across the entire city of Boston. So I'm just curious, how does DoIT determine where to set up wicket Wi-Fi? And is there an approval or community response to this process? Can you just help us understand the mechanics of that?
Happy to do so, Councilor. Wicket-free Wi-Fi is really an extension of the city's fiber network. Where we have city fiber in a city building, we put up APs, wireless access points for wicket-free Wi-Fi. Likewise, the library does it at libraries and the schools do it within the schools. So combined from all three city schools and libraries, there are hundreds out there, but they are virtually all of them are extending off a school, off a city building, off a municipal building, whether it be a school or a community center or something along those lines. One of the reasons for that is that we do have a rather large city network for city use, and all of the fiber that is in that comes from the cable broadband providers within the city. It comes from Comcast, Verizon, RCN, and also the new company Crown, where council approved the contract about a year or two ago. So all of those contracts have a kind of like a non-compete clause, but really what it is, it's for municipal use only. We can give away wicket-free Wi-Fi as a public convenience around city buildings. We always try to do it when we can in a main street or a neighborhood business district if possible. I think over the coming years, it will get stronger. And currently we do have hundreds. I think 1,000 is too much of a reach. I think more, it's around 700, but I'd have to double check APs out there. And it will continue to grow. I think in the year, because of security issues, we really can't use like a community partner right now to extend on that. All of the Wi-Fi kind of comes through the city network, so we have to be a little protective. This is something new for us. We do think that there should be like a neighborhood contribution or a nonprofit contribution to this, where people and businesses that do have Wi-Fi can offer it to the public, and the public can be confident that that is safe and secure. I think that's a future step.
Okay, thank you for that. And because I'm very mindful of the limited time that I have 2 more questions that I want to get through. So, and following the same thread, thank you, Mr. Lynch, for that response. I'm just also very curious, and I just kind of want to name it, that the neighborhoods like the South End, Mattapan, Lower Alston, and parts of East Boston have absolutely no wicket-free Wi-Fi. And I know that we have libraries and schools in those areas. And I'm just curious, what is the plan to expand into those neighborhoods that currently do not have this service? And then I have one more question. So if we could just help us understand the why in these pockets of the city, we don't have wicket-free Wi-Fi.
Oh, Counselor, duly noted, all of them are quote unquote on the schedule or in the plan, so to speak. And the reason why is that this is a work in progress. We are continuing to expand. You mentioned East Boston. I know that we now have about 6 to a dozen in East Boston. I don't know the exact locations off the top of my head. I want to say Central Square for some and some around Maverick.
Okay.
Mattapan, similar, outside the library. Again, the way I look at it, we look at where there's a city building and we grow from there.
Okay, I'm happy to see that that is on the slate. I do also just want to name that these are neighborhoods that historically have high concentrations of people who are living in poverty, immigrant communities that are the ones that we're talking specifically about today. So I just kind of want to put that on the fast track and see how we can help them out. And then I have one more question. How are we educating people about this service? Especially, I'm interested in knowing how we're communicating to communities of color, specifically non-English speaking communities as well. I don't think that everyone knows that Wicket Wi-Fi is something that is accessible. What efforts are we making to ensure that folks understand that this is a resource? Are we encouraging people to set up shop in front of a library and do remote learning and remote access? Like, how are we addressing the need and how we're communicating this to those folks who may not have access to this information?
Okay, I guess I'll take that one, Counselor. I think right now what we're using is signage where Wi-Fi is available. In addition, there's both a map and instructions, if you will, on the city's website, boston.gov. If you just put in wicket free, it'll show you some information about where it's located, when it's available, how to sign on. Lastly, if you are out and about and using your phone should snap to wicket-free Wi-Fi if you open, say, a browser on your phone. It's an open network. The only thing is there's like a little check off to security features on the front end of it.
Is this in multiple languages? I mean, is this something that, and I don't know technology, I don't know what the cost would look like, or if there's something that already exists, but is it something that is easily translated into different languages so that people know? Or the signage that you're talking about, is it in Spanish? Is it in Haitian Creole? Is it in multiple languages?
Oh, actually, I don't know. I think the signage when it originally went up is somewhat generic and just graphic. It was a lime green kind of radio signal that suggested it was there. And there was nothing beyond that. I'll double check on the website. I know the website information is accessible in multiple languages. I can't say exactly which languages right now.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'm just going to ask one last
CNN has
question.
run some PSAs in the past in several languages advertising the fact and giving people the link and where they need to go to get more information.
Okay. And I have one last question, Councilor Flynn. Is that, or no? You're going to shut me down. What's up? Let me
Yeah,
know.
can we move to the next one? We'll get you at the second go around.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flaherty was also an original co-sponsor. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, thanks to the city and to the city partners panel. We appreciate the work that do it, and Boston Neighborhood Network Media, as well as Techco's Home does. So for the gentlemen that are on this panel, I appreciate the work that you guys and your staffs do to make things work for our city and to keep our city moving forward. A question for Dan Noyes. And again, thanks for the work that Tech Goes Home does. It's so important that we make sure that our community organizations and small businesses that serve so many people in our communities have access to technology. So can you just speak briefly about your experience during COVID-19 and where are there still ongoing gaps in access to tech and the internet?
It's a great question. This is going to be the sad answer, Counselor, is everywhere. That this is a huge problem that we are fighting against. I can tell you just in terms of what we're seeing in, so we work currently with about 150 community partners to offer our courses. So we're in 45 Boston schools and community centers and homeless shelters and everywhere. We currently have a wait list of 65 organizations across the city that want to work with us that we can't work with solely because of funding. We just don't have the funding for. And those organizations represent nearly every neighborhood, every community in the city. I mean, as you might imagine, the vast majority of our learners come from Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and East Boston. But you know, Back Bay, we run with Women's Lunch Place, which is a day shelter for women that's right down near Copley. And so it's not obviously just those communities. I think what Councilor Mejia said earlier specifically was if the estimate that 5% of Boston families don't have internet, I mean, that represents nearly 3,000 people. And if you also think that you've got 4,500 homeless families in Boston Public Schools, homeless students, I should say, in Boston Public Schools, how are they getting internet? I wish I could say that we've had massive success in this neighborhood. I just think the problem is very large. I will say that Boston as a city is doing a lot more than a lot of other places, but we still have a lot of work to do. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I agree, and I appreciate the work that you're doing there, Dan. And obviously, like everything else, we wish there were more of you and more capacity for Tech Goes Home. So I know that that's 150. That's a big number, 150 organizations. I was sort of thinking more in the sort of 75 to 100 range. So that's excellent that you've got that reach, particularly during COVID. Your days must have been going by so fast, just dealing with everything coming your way. Quick question.
We had, if I could just say, like on March 1st, before COVID hit, we had over 1,000 people in various Tech Goes Home courses that we had to shut down.
Wow.
And then all credit goes to my program team. I mean, I go to hearings. I don't actually do any work, right? So they're the ones that actually do all the work. And they took a 20-year existing in-person program and flipped it on its head and created this incredible distance learning program where we've now graduated 1,000 people from. So we're going to end up graduating more than 4,000 people this year,
Wow.
which is, again, it's a testament not only to my staff, but to our partners, like some of the other people on this, with like Glenn's crew. And it's just, they are the lifeblood of our organization. So all the credit to places like BNN for jumping up and keeping it going.
That is spectacular. Great news, Dan. And then to Glenn, who's a longtime pal and just does great work over at Boston Neighborhood Network. And Glenn, can you just speak briefly about the partnership that you have with the Boston Public Schools?
Okay, well, what we did right away in March, thank you, Counselor, for the question. I appreciate it. And yes, we are old friends. We go back. One of the things that we did right away in March was to reach out to Boston Public Schools with the fact that the kids aren't going to be in class and that there was this inequity as far as internet access is concerned. And I immediately became part of their committee that was going to talk about how do we teach these kids away from the classroom? What are the resources that we have? And internet was going to be, we're going to use Google Classroom. We were going to do all of these things. And right away, it became apparent that the Chromebooks were going to be a difficulty and that access to the internet was going to be a problem. And right away, we kind of said, well, we've got this station, the basic cable people get. Anybody that has Roku or any of that can get these stations. Why don't we develop an opportunity to get some programming? So we've been doing preschool programming twice a week. We've been doing live call-in math programs where kids in elementary school, kids in middle school, kids in high school can can tune into these television programs and say, hey, wait a minute, back up a bit. Can you explain that to me again? Then we've also got a great organization that works within the Boston Public Schools called Science Club for Girls. And it's an amazingly funny and very, very groovy program that talks about science and involves the young women in our educational system so that they can, it's just a really cool program. It's targeted for them. And then we also have STEM Goes Home. We have the workout groups. They're all doing it, and the arts too, of course, the arts. And we get them involved in all of the programming. They send us the programs. We play them on the air. The kids go back and rewatch it. We're right in the middle of getting that wound up again. We don't know which way we're going to go. If the kids are in school, we don't need to be showing them during the day. And of course, the Goodnight Scholars.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you for the work you and your team are doing, and I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Councilor Flaherty. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good for now for this panel.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Braden?
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Many of my questions have actually been addressed. I'm just curious about the reach of Tech Goes Home to our elders. I think they were particularly impacted by the social isolation. They were impacted by being unable to access their community computer room in some of their housing projects or where they're living. So I just wanted to get an update on where we are with services to our elders.
It's a great question, and it's a particular group that we do focus on. So last year, at least, more than 10% of our learners, so nearly 600 of them were senior citizens that graduated through our program. We have a newfound, wrong way to put that, a new push for telemedicine work specifically around for seniors. One of our most recent graduates, some of you might know, Lieutenant Colonel Enoch Woodhouse. You may have, Councilor Bach, you know him, Councilor Flynn. He's 95. He took a Tech Goes Home program actually with our partnership with the Copley Library and learned how to access health resources online. He was a hoot. If you don't know him, Google him. He's a Tuskegee Airman, which is just is amazing. But yeah, so for seniors in particular, and working very closely with Emily Shea at Age Strong, we've had a relationship with them for over 10 years. But yeah, it's definitely a good focus of ours is for seniors because of the social isolation issues.
And is there a particular way, how do elders who would like to get up to speed on the internet, is there a way for them to get a referral, or how does that work? How does that work?
Nearly all of our learners come to us via our partner organizations. So for example, if they're in touch with someone at Age Strong or any of the senior housing in the area, or via a community center or whatever the association is or community organization they work with, they should reach out to those groups. They can also reach out to us if they want directly, and then we can tell them, oh, there's these courses running seniors, we prefer to do senior courses when with other seniors, if that makes sense, just because it can be challenging. I was visiting a course once, and it took 4 hours for the group of seniors to sign up for an email account. And at the end, they were kind of flirting with each other via email. It was one of the most adorable things I've ever seen in my life, is that they were emailing each other back and forth across the room, having never sent email before. This was actually a TSN lab in the basement of the Latin Academy, and it was just adorable. So yes, reach out to their community organizations that are associated with their libraries. We work with 11 different branches of the Boston Public Library, and then they're also welcome to reach out to us, either call us or check out our website.
How is that working now in COVID? Is that a real barrier to being able to do classes? Especially for seniors who like sort of one-to-one instruction almost. Is that difficult, or what's happening there?
Yes, it's difficult. But my team took it on as a challenge. So what we do, just to give you the quick process, is we have our instructors who are all community-based leaders. They're school teachers, they're librarians, they're homeless shelter, social workers. They get people together and say, let's do a course. They reach out to us and say, all right, here are the names and addresses of the people that are going to be in my course. We then UPS a computer, a bag, a mouse, a hotspot if they need it. We sign them up for internet ahead of time. It gets sent right to their doorstep. They open that box and there's instructions right in there. All of our instructors then call each of the people to make sure they can get online, make sure they can click on the Zoom button so they can start their class. And then they go through the process of running a TGH course, which involves a lot of one-on-one time. I mean, our instructors, again, this goes back to what I was saying about, the people working at BNN or any of our partner sites. They've just been incredible on this, doing a lot of that one-on-one work. And we have a great team of volunteers that have been helping out as well.
I have to thank you so much for all this work. It is a lifeline for so many of our elders, and especially the other work with the young people, students and families, etc. But for our elders, it's particularly important. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden, and for Dan and for Kenzie Block. I proudly have a Lieutenant Colonel Woodhouse poster up on my wall.
I love it.
Yeah, he's a great guy. So I know he's also good friends with Kenzie. So we're proud of his service to our country. So City Councilor Anissa Asabi, George. Councilor Block.
Thank you, Chairman Flynn. And yes, Woody is both a constituent and a member of my church congregation, and was in for my maiden speech. I've got one of those posters too, so we're all big fans of his.
Oh, I thought it was a special one he just gave to me.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I thought the same. No, thank you all so much, and I just want to stress, I think the programs that we're doing that you all have talked about today, everything from BNN to the Tech Goes Home, and Wicked Free Wi-Fi and the fiber optic cable in a lot of our municipal buildings. I mean, I do agree. I think it was Mike who said we are doing a lot more than a lot of cities. And I think, it's important to recognize that. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about kind of the broader picture of just, trying to think about how could we be even more on the vanguard here in Boston, because I know that there are a lot of states in the country where municipalities are like sort of explicitly prohibited by their state law from really engaging in a lot of municipal broadband related activities, and we're fortunate that we're not one of those. And so I'm kind of interested in how, as Boston, we can be a real leader. So I guess one question is just like, municipal broadband. Have we thought about it? Have we run that up the flagpole? I routinely I represent a bunch of very heavily networked parts of the city, and still there are many, many of my neighborhoods where all people can get is a Xfinity service that they are unhappy with from Comcast, both from a price and a performance perspective. And I mean, to the point that I made at the beginning of this hearing about the internet really being a utility, if I could make a magic wand and start over here, like this would be something like water that we provided across the city. And we wouldn't be in this kind of dance with our providers that we're in. So I just wonder, you mentioned the non-compete clause for wicked free Wi-Fi, and that's the kind of thing that I wish we were not constrained to. So I would love to hear from David or from Mike just about kind of what the possibilities are for a more forceful push into municipal broadband.
Mike, you want to go first, and I'll finish up.
Sure, be happy to, David. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. Good question. You're right. Massachusetts is not a state where we have been exempted or ruled out from doing municipal broadband. The challenges we've had in Boston is such a dense city, and building out something, we've looked at this, I don't know, many times, I guess, over the years, because we have some resources that we thought could make it work. It's a question about whether or not it is viable and whether or not it is affordable. We haven't found kind of an equation where that matches up right now. We have looked at things like our fire alarm network. How could we, it's a 300-mile network, how can we adapt that to this situation? It doesn't quite fly. We've looked at utility poles that are in the city owned by Eversource and Verizon. Could we attach and deploy that way? Likewise, it had challenges. 4 years ago, the mayor brought Verizon in, and Verizon said something they'd never said before to the city of Boston. They said, yeah, we'll do Fios in Boston. So for the first time in 30 years, Boston had some serious competition. Right now, I think on the front end of this hearing, I mentioned that we have 3 broadband providers in Boston through facilities. They're cable companies, essentially, RCN, Verizon, and Comcast. And we have 3 wireless companies that are also doing it, NetBlazer and Starry are 2 of them. Collectively, I believe everybody is getting reached or near to getting reached. The challenges we face are, oddly enough, new construction is a challenge because sometimes the developer misses or forgets to bring in more than one provider. So people in a multiple dwelling unit might have only one provider because whoever built out the building didn't bring in the second one. That's something that's a bit of a challenge, and we try to address that through the permitting process, if you will. Secondly, sometimes in very large developments, you might have an historic relationship between the provider and the owner of the property or the property management company, which has let others not come in. That is technically not legal under FCC rules, and it tends to get fought on a 1-by-1 case because it used to be allowed and now it isn't. So it's a changing landscape that they have to be made aware of. Lastly, when we ran the numbers on the different options, fire alarm, other things, building things out our own, the investments by 2 companies, say Comcast and Verizon, probably exceed $300 million to build the backbone to provide broadband service in Boston. I'm not, the city doesn't have that resource. I'm not sure where it would come from. When the state went to take care of Western Massachusetts, which had no broadband, no cable, no cell service, they built a fiber pipe right out west all the way past those towns, probably 10 or 12 years ago. Many of those towns are still fighting today to get broadband service. I mean, even though the first mile or the big backbone was built, the last mile is the largest challenge. That is getting from the street into the home. I'm sorry if I'm a little all over the place, but it's a complicated issue. I think Boston is ahead of most communities. I read last week that I think it was Cleveland who was looking at maybe 1/3 of their residents unserved. I think we're well ahead of that, but I think we do have the liability that every city has. The underserved here in Boston are predominantly for socioeconomic reasons, and we're struggling to address that. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mike. No, that's all very helpful. I guess 2 quick follow-ups I would have on that are, I mean, one would be, it seems to me that when I think about, people who aren't able to access Comcast Internet Essentials because of a past experience with the cable company, and when I think about families in most need, I find myself thinking a lot about my past work at the Housing Authority. And I guess I am curious. It seems to me if I were going to start municipal broadband at to greater scale with our residential addresses, I would start with the BHA properties. And I'm wondering, just based on your answer, what work we've done on that front.
Boy, I'm glad you asked the question because I forgot to mention them. First off, we are connecting the Housing Authority to the city network, and that's in Boston. All the councilors know that's somewhat unique. That was part of the capital project that all of the councilors approved to expand our fiber network, but it's unique in that the authority is an independent agency. It's almost unheard of that the city would reach out and say, we have to do this, but we recognize the need to help them with things like their administration, their convenience, Wi-Fi, their security issues, et cetera, their environmental issues, all that which can be handled on a platform of our fiber network. Meanwhile, I know that right now, the BHA is looking to connect to that fiber that we have provided to them, and it's not every unit, every development yet. It's maybe about 6 shy, but that'll happen within the next year. But they're going to put in access points. They're going to be using this for administrative purposes. They're going to be using it for security, environmental purposes, and it'll be a quantum leap for the Housing Authority in terms of bringing its connectivity up to a standard with the rest of the city.
And that's great to hear. I would love to see us move to a world in which we could also be, this is where I get back to the sort of municipal broadband, right? In which we'd be like providing an alternative service for the residents as well there, and kind of, being indirect competition with, I think a lot of those properties just have one of the main providers rolling them.
That's right. So they will no longer have one main provider. They will all have a competitive provider. In addition to that, we'll take care of sort of the back end of the functions of the authority, as you will. Mm-hmm. And lastly, much like the school department looking to secure 2,000 for Boston families, I believe that the BHA is trying to figure out how to do something for its residents as well. Of course, the challenge in the BHA, as you well know, is sometimes it's window versus something else. These are tough choices.
Absolutely, which is why it's good that we're involved in it on a city capital side as well. I'll leave. I'm assuming from what you've said that we're not sitting in Boston with a lot of unused dark fiber that we could activate for this situation.
That would be a correct assumption.
Correct. And I suspect my time is up. I'm again really grateful for all you do. I'd love to see us push further. And I did make note of your comments about sort of new developments and what we can require of people to build and how much we can require people to let people in. I think if there's anything that you need on the council side in the form of an ordinance or anything on that front, it's something I'd love to see us work on.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Buck. Thank you, Councilor Buck. I'm just looking at my colleagues that are on. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, and thank you to all of the panelists. Really appreciate the work both inside of city government and outside. Boston is doing well compared to other municipalities right here in the Commonwealth. And Mike and David, thank you. David, obviously I've connected actual legislators and local municipal electeds in other municipalities with you to help them look at setting up broadband. My first question is there data and research available on one, just, and maybe this is for the chair, Councilor Flynn, in terms of internet access and the strength of a signal sort of available by neighborhood in Boston, and if it's broken down by race or ethnicity or some other marker, that would be helpful if we have that somewhere. And then the second has to do with just this municipal broadband versus private options. And if there's research out there that suggests that, broader coverage or more equitable coverage comes from broadband versus private options. You often hear different sort of anecdotal stories, but I don't know that I've really seen in-depth research with respect to the difference in terms of access and the sort of the cost. So if there's any information available to that would be helpful. And then, many of my questions were asked in terms of how do we expand access to broadband to certain neighborhoods. Right now, my district, obviously the biggest neighborhoods are Dorchester and Mattapan. How do we expand it to senior buildings or housing authorities? I've seen some progress in that regard. I remember I think it was my first week on the council, was looking at a senior building right in Dorchester and seeing how we could get those seniors access to internet. And there were some private options available. Actually, I think only one at that time, but it wasn't free. And the seniors really needed it to be free. So we've seen some progress, but I think my biggest question is, we know many of the gaps. And I think, Dan, you talked about this too, just in terms of the resources, the lack of resources. And I just, we're in Boston, in greater Boston, with billions of dollars flowing through this economy. Even in the midst of COVID-19, we know there are companies that are doing really well. And so I just refuse to accept the resource gap for an issue that is so critical. And, it's not just about, like you guys have all said, Glenn, I mean, all of you, it's not just about hardware, software, it's also about the training, the services. We have all these higher ed institutions, we have MIT, Harvard, you name it. We're so resource heavy, not just financially, but also when it comes to institutional resources. I'd be curious to hear from folks, why does this, how do we get over the gap? Is it we're not prioritizing this? Is it we're not working in collectively? Are we working in silos? I just refuse to say the gap is the problem when we have such great leadership and all of you who are doing this work every day. And so how do we as counselors and where we sit really push for that gap to close in terms of whether it's resources, monetary or human capital or expertise?
If I could jump in, you're preaching to the choir here.
That's right, to all of you, I know. If I had all the money in my pocket, I'd give it to you yesterday.
I mean, I can tell you, if I might, Councilor Flynn, can I jump in? That our cost it's about $700 for a family. That includes a new computer, a year of internet, which we give them, and then the basic skills that we're talking about. So when you think of it, it's a pretty simple number to work with. If you multiply whatever number you have and multiply it by $700, and it gets you to about what you're talking about. I mean, I will say that the COVID has really, I mentioned this in my testimony, that we've seen a huge increase in private sector funding. The city has been incredibly supportive of us over the last 20 years and continues to be now. So we've been able to remain level funded, and yet our private sector funding is on pace now to be about twice what our city funding was, while 2 years ago it was even. So we're seeing a lot of interest. Our fear, though, and we're having conversations internally about this right now, is that right now there is a spotlight on digital equity. We know how quick things change. So we're nervous that what happens in 2021, 2022, when no one's talking about digital equity anymore, will that private sector money go away? So thank you for raising the question, is I guess my comment.
If I may, Councilor Flynn, thank you, Dan. That was, Councilor, I think one of the issues you hit the nail on. Let's identify these areas. I mean, narrow down where this broadband areas are. But I also think that educating people that there's a problem is sometimes an issue. Making sure that the communities at large recognize and realize that this is something that is being addressed. I sit on several committees on inclusion and equity, and that's one of the main things they talk about, is that sometimes people don't recognize that there is that problem. And I think more meetings like this and more meetings that all of us are putting out to the community, identifying these problems and bringing people into those issues is a step. It's not the solution, obviously, but it's a step. And I think that because of the areas that we're going to be identifying as areas, we've got to do it in multiple languages. We've got to do it at multiple times. And we've got to be able to get the message across that there are resources, there are ways around this issue. Because I believe there are ways around the issue, and it can be accomplished. I don't want to think about the changing in technology. I want to think about what we can do right now to get these kids the broadband they need to attend
Right.
an English class or a history class.
No, I absolutely agree with that latter point. You know, short-term solutions, long-term, we sort of have to be doing both.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm at my time, Councilor Flynn, but so in terms of the data or research, that would be helpful if there's any follow-up there. And we'll continue to push this. And I think you're right on the people not understanding the nature of the problem. It was shocking to me how many folks didn't know a digital divide existed, forget in Boston, in this country, until the pandemic, right? Obviously, you guys have been doing this work for a long time and have seen it up close and personal. So look forward to continuing to work in partnership with you and finally closing this gap. So thank you all for the work you do every day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. And Councilor Campbell, yes, we're going to have a working session probably in the next 60 days or so. And I do hope to bring in some of the providers and hopefully that they can provide specific answers to those questions. But in the meantime, we will do some research from this committee and get those answers, and I'll make sure we share them with my colleagues on the council.
Thank you. And thank you, David and Mike. Really appreciate their responsiveness on questions.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Flynn, if I could just add that the American Community Survey, ACS, which is run by the census, has very specific neighborhood-focused internet access and computer data. And David and Mike would know better than me. The city actually has this great map where you can actually go neighborhood by neighborhood and see where the lack of access and the lack of computers are, and no one will be surprised by what they see.
No, that's great to know, Dan, and we'll call on you for that working session. Having said that, I think we have asked all the questions for the first panel. I want to shift now to the second panel, but before I do that, I do want to say thank you to the administration staff that is here. I want to say thank you to Dan and the other panelists that are here. You provided excellent feedback and information, engaged our council colleagues, and you provided excellent background information. So we want to say thank you, and thank you for the great work that you're doing in the city. Having said that, I want to shift to the second panel, which includes Akeem Jackson, who's the Senior Director of Family Engagement and External Relations at Education Network. And I also wanted to let the first panel know, if you want to stay on, you can, but I know you have busy schedules as well. If you wanted to leave us, that's also fine. But again, wanted to say thank you. The second person is Pam Edinger. She's the president of Bunker Hill Community College. We have Lorena Lapora, executive director, Massachusetts Latinos for Education. And Deborah Baucus, who's the executive director, Castle Square Tenants Organization, right here in the South End. So I want to say thank you to the panelists for being here. And with that, I would ask if you would like to go right into opening statements, and maybe we could start with Mr. Jackson.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akeem Jackson. As he stated, I'm the Senior Director of Family Engagement and External Relations for Up Education Network. We currently serve 3 schools in Boston and over 2,000 students. I want to share a special thank you to Councilors Mejia, Flynn, and Flaherty for putting this on and allowing me to be a part. Today, as students across the city of Boston engage in remote learning, we're here to address gaps in providing equitable access to the internet. As you all know, remote learning is dependent upon students having technology in the form of a computer and high-speed internet that can support live streaming. Not having these important tools is a serious barrier to students being able to learn and thrive. These tools are essential to students' education. Back in the spring, when we first began to engage in remote learning, we identified a huge need around our families not having adequate internet access. We work very closely with them to better understand the need and offer support. Currently, we are partnering with Comcast to ensure this need is met. We're also working very closely with Verizon to provide hotspots for those who do not qualify for Comcast. Our approach is about making sure quality internet is accessible by covering the cost for families and making the enrollment and setup process more easy and seamless. This is not a resource issue, this is an equity issue. Ensuring that our students have access to high quality education regardless of their family's financial situation. In order for our students to be successful, they need access to the internet to engage in everyday learning. While things are in a much better place now than they were in the spring, the need will continue. Today is about coming together as a city to put together a more comprehensive, long-term plan that addresses this issue on a grander scale and provides a sustainable solution. The reality is that this is our new norm, and this is a norm that highlights the need for internet and technology as the world progresses. On behalf of Up Education Network and the students and families we serve, I would like to say thank you again for your time and consideration. And again, a special thank you to Councilors Flynn, Flaherty, and Mayhew. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Next is Pam Edinger, who's the president of Bunker Hill Community College, an outstanding educational facility in our city, provides tremendous opportunities for so many young people across our city, especially our immigrant neighbors. So we want to say thank you to Pam for being here with us. And Pam, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and greetings to our counselors and the guests for this hearing. A lot of what has been said from the administrative team holds true for Bunker Hill. We have about 16,000 students. And in March, in the middle of March, when we pivoted 1,700 courses online, we saw where the breaks are. It was very much like a lightning in the night, right? All the fissures and all the cracks and all the gaps just became clear to us. We bought close to 700 to 800 laptops to distribute to our students who are needing laptops. And almost all of them have challenges with Wi-Fi, either not strong enough, not consistent enough, or there weren't any. And this is not only true with our students, but with our employees. We sent home only about, I would say, less than 10% of our employees are working on site now. So they needed VPNs and all of the things that were connected to that. And they didn't have, a lot of our employees didn't have the adequate either equipment or the Wi-Fi to do their work. So I think either one of the counselors or one of you guests says that, you know, we have a utility not met. I think it was Councilor Bach. And I think that is true because this is a public health issue. This is a public education issue, higher education issue, but I think it's also a commerce issue in which commerce is not being conducted online. So when I went into trying to find solution for my students, we found that buying hotspots for them is not a long-term solution. So we began taking advantage of the Comcast program. We ended up giving students a sort of Wi-Fi scholarships for them to keep up with the payments. And a lot of times we'll ask students to turn their smartphones into a hotspot and then help them pay for it. So the socioeconomic piece is a large piece of it. And we've been fundraising with philanthropies and so on to backstop, right, the dollars that we didn't have. We do find that about 3/4 of our students are parents. And about half of those parents are single moms. And about 3/4 of our students are living in the lowest 2 quintile of income. So the socioeconomic piece is the largest piece. We do find that if we gave them the resources, the financial resources to get to the Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is available. Now, some of it's wobbly, but most of it is available. It is frustrating that there isn't one system that I can send students to. They are more confused than anything else when they go out looking for those resources. So I would validate what has been said before. And all of our students live within 8 miles of the college. So they are the parents of the BPS students. and they're both fighting over equipment at home. They're struggling over the same access. So God forbid anybody turns on the toaster, while the computers are going on, the breakers go. It's a problem. It's a problem that I've been struggling with, and all my college presidents are struggling with. A lot of what has been built is built on campus, and when the campus closes down, all the access is gone. So there you are.
Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you for the work Bunker Hill Community College and Roxbury Community College.
Yes.
They played in our city and in our economy. It's because of your teachers that really helped keep Boston moving forward. So thank you to the great work of Bunker Hill, to Roxbury Community College and the Urban College as well. Could I next ask Lorena Lapora, who's the Executive Director, Mass Latinos for Education, if you'd like to give an opening statement?
Yes, thank you. Buenas tardes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Councilor Mejia, Flynn, and Flaherty for inviting me and for holding this important hearing to discuss internet access and digital equity in the city of Boston. My name is Lorena Lopera, and I'm the Executive Director of Latinos for Education here in Massachusetts. We're the first national Latino-led and founded organization dedicated to ensuring the needs and voice of Latino students and educators are met. I am also the mother of Joaquin, who's a 6-year-old who is currently enrolled at the Hurley School here in the Boston Public Schools. So I come to this testimony with my personal as well as my professional experience. Now, before I jump into my testimony, I want to thank Tech Goes Home for its longstanding leadership in the work of digital equity and for continuing to highlight the systemic issue that has long existed prior to the pandemic. So thank you. We know that these incredibly difficult times and resources are limited. The decisions and actions that our city and school leaders take will have long-lasting effects on the 54,000 children that are currently enrolled in Boston Public Schools. At this point, when everything from learning to accessing health and social services has gone virtual, lacking a device or connectivity is unacceptable and puts families in great danger. For students, it's almost as if they're not enrolled in school and in the shadows of our education system. That is why our organization is actively monitoring the tech gaps that exist across the Commonwealth and pushing for universal access to technological devices and internet connectivity for all students, but especially for our Latinx students. We know that not every student in Boston has access to a device or connectivity. The latest data shows that at the very least, there are approximately 2,700 students who don't have reliable internet access. And these are generous estimates. And our school district needs to do a better job at publishing data so that we have real-time snapshots of the need in our community and that we can deploy the right interventions. I say that these are generous estimates because earlier this year, we surveyed Latinx families across the state to hear about how COVID-19 pandemic has impacted their children's education. And we found that 46% of parents were concerned that their child was experiencing learning loss as a result of this pandemic. 52% of caregivers are worried about income insecurity as a result of this pandemic. 43% of caregivers shared that a decline in mental health is dramatically impacting their child. And 27% are concerned by the loss of socialization their child is experiencing. 21% of those caregivers also identified that their household needs help accessing devices and connectivity in order to support their child's education. Now, we know that all of these things are interrelated, and I consider myself privileged. I'm adequately resourced, I have a job, I speak English, and I understand the education system. But I will also say that if my son had not received a device from his school, who already had them readily available back in spring, I would have had to purchase one, and that would have stretched my family. I know many of my son's peers and neighbors who did not sign up for a Chromebook last spring, thinking that our children would be back in their classrooms in a couple of weeks. In the summer, when they realized this was essential, they signed up, and some of them are still awaiting a device. Many parents aren't in the same position that I am, and we need to recognize that. Additionally, as I'm sharing some of my personal experiences, even with access to high-speed internet, I lose my connection during important meetings. I'm surprised I haven't lost it during this one. And my son has gotten booted off of Zoom during his class. So imagine a parent who has multiple children and adults streaming classes or work and is trying to hold their household together off of a mobile hotspot or some other means. Our current approach is not sustainable. We must accept that while a tremendous effort has been deployed by the city and the district, we must continue to innovate and do more. It's still not enough. I leave you with a few of these things to consider. The first is we need to engage the business community and corporate partners. We know many of them have devices, some have resources, and many are ready to help. The city could use its convening power to bring the private sector into these conversations and have them be a part of the solution. How many devices are currently sitting in empty offices? The second is that it is a time to innovate and reimagine the future we want for our city and schools. We must fully consider the option of investing in technology such as mesh networks. There are cities experimenting with universal access by creating mesh Wi-Fi networks and partnering with universities, restaurants, libraries, and other community spaces to make the internet accessible to all of its residents. Imagine, in a city like Boston, we can be a leader. We have a wealth of colleges and businesses. If we worked with campuses such as Roxbury Community College, Wentworth, Northeastern University, Boston College, Bunker Hill Community College, Boston University, the list goes on, to create a mesh network that gave critical access to high-speed internet to parts of Boston, such as Brighton, Mission Hill, Roxbury, etc. Long-term, this pandemic has no doubt made it so we must continue to fundamentally transition broadband access to a public utility, investing in more fiber optics and infrastructure so that the city can provide high-speed internet to all the residents at a cost that all of our families can afford. My last point is we must listen to and meet those who have long been underserved by our systems because they have the solutions that we need for our current problems. Growing up as an undocumented child in a household with limited English ability gives me some of that perspective. As a leader now, I constantly ask myself, what would this decision, this program, or this communication mean for me as a child or for my parents? Putting our most vulnerable residents at the forefront of decision-making is vital. This requires us to acknowledge that we have multilingual speakers in our city, and that many don't find government and schools accessible to their working hours or inviting in general. We need to fundamentally change our business as usual mentality if we want to create real lasting change in Boston. Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this important hearing.
Thank you very much. The next person I'd like to invite is Deborah Bacchus, who's the Executive Director, Castle Square Tenants Organization in the South End. And just recently, Deborah and her team had an outstanding outreach effort to count as many people as we could for the census. They had a great turnout the other day. So I want to say thank you to Deborah for all the great work you're doing and ask if you have an opening statement as well.
Thank you for asking me to participate in today's digital equity hearing. My name is Deborah Bacchus. I am founder and executive director of the Castle Square Tenants Organization. I am here today to talk about a need in the community regarding affordable tech support. What we have found is that a number of residents throughout the city of Boston who do have computers that are not being used because they cannot afford for-profit computer repair services. Over the last 8 years, CSTO has offered a program for our youth called Square Tech Computer Repair Training Program for our youth, where we partner with the BPS school system. We stay in touch with the guidance counselors who send us students who are interested in computer science. Our computer technology class, where we bring in youth throughout the city of Boston for a 10-week program where we pay these teens a stipend at minimum wage. During the school year, it's minimum wage for 10 hours a week, and during the summer, it's 20 hours a week. We teach them computer science. We teach them how to build a computer from scratch. We teach them also how to code. Once the students graduate from this session, we have another program called Square Tech Computer Repair, where low-income residents throughout the city of Boston come to this establishment to get their computers repaired for a suggested donation. We're also a licensed Microsoft refurbisher program where we were able to get these licenses for $30 that would cost parents over hundreds of dollars to get these licenses put onto their computers. We also provide house calls for Castle Square residents who are in need of support services for their computers. So regarding the digital equity portion, there's another portion that regarding the computer support services that are greatly needed throughout the city of Boston, and we are providing that need at Castle Square. The computers that we receive are donated from businesses throughout the city. Tufts Medical Center has donated desktops and laptops. When companies is donating computers to us, and small businesses donate computers and laptops to us that we repair for needy families throughout the city of Boston. We're very proud of this program. It also allows our teens to get ready for college. When COVID hit, we had 20 students enrolled in the program. I'm very fortunate to have a staff that was able to turn around an online curriculum within 3 weeks so that we could continue the program and continue to provide the needed stipend that was desperately needed with many of their parents losing their jobs. This summer, CSTO took it upon themselves to purchase 30 computers for students because some were trying to do their work on their cell phones. And what we found with the Chromebooks, they do not have the capacity that's needed for the students to participate in this class. So CSTO took it upon themselves to purchase brand new computers from Dell that they could use for school. It can be used for the family also. So we're very proud of the program that we offer at Castle Square. And students graduate from the repair side, then they move over and they're advanced to go to the help desk that we have set up, where people can come throughout the city of Boston for affordable tech support. So that's what I wanted to speak on today.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Deborah, for the work Castle Square is doing on these critical issues. We're going to open it up to questions. Maybe I'll start first, and I could open it up to the 4 panelists, whoever wants to jump in. And I know all of you prioritize language access as well. It's a critical part of your programs. Tell me what the city could do to be more helpful, or what could the private sector do to be more helpful in making sure that English language learners get the resources, get the education, get the training as it relates to digital access, digital equity. So I'd open that up to any of you or all of you.
So I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Yep.
I mean, I was just going to say one simple thing. I think it's going to be important to really interface with that community to get an understanding of what types of training do folks in that community need access to, and also just getting feedback from those folks. I think as we've approached, this internally as a school, we've really worked to connect with families in the languages that they speak, again, to get a deep sense of what are your needs, what are the areas where we can educate you more, and provide more resources and more supports around. And so I think the key is going to be to allow those individuals opportunities to really, speak on their behalf, to say exactly what they need and what's going to be most beneficial.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that we don't reinvent the wheel, because right now there are multiple programs, both on the state and the municipal level, to address ESL, English learning in the city and in Greater Boston. The idea, I think, is not to invent yet another system to teach the digital competencies, but maybe to integrate that into the existing ESL programs. Now, the ESL programs are somewhat fractured. Somewhere along the line, somebody's got to have to do a landscape analysis of where those programs are being put and where the gaps are. But I would caution building yet another very complicated system to navigate for folks who don't speak the English language. They're already plugged into their communities, and they know, most of them know where that is. So that would be one approach that I would suggest.
Yep.
Yeah, I would add that I think that programs exist, as Pam said. However, I don't know that our communication about sharing out that these programs are in existence is very clear. And so I think being sure that we're using multiple formats for media, right? So not just sending the translated flyer. By the way, let's get professionals translating those flyers, and not just the group of volunteers. So I think making sure that it's in various formats, that there's audio that's being recorded in multiple languages, that it's legible in multiple languages, that there are videos in multiple languages, and that we're reaching this through, in English, you are saturated with this information. You hear it on your news, you hear it from your schools in an email, you hear it from the phone call that you received, you hear it from your neighbor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in other languages, it's much more limited. And so we need to be intentional about the media resources that we are utilizing to make sure that we're reaching out to all of our communities. Social media is another one. The city has social media accounts, but up until recently, most of it was all just in English, right? And so we need to be intentional. Is this reaching the most vulnerable people in our city? Is this actually being targeted to the most vulnerable people in our city? And if the answer is I don't know or no, then it's not enough.
Thank you. Deborah? Deborah, would you like to respond?
Well, at Castle Square, everything, Castle Square Apartments, everything is translated. All our documents are translated whether it's coming from the tenant organization or the management office.
Thank you, Deborah. With that, I would like to ask Councilor Mejia to start the questioning from the councilors. Councilor Mejia?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Flynn. I do have some questions that I wanted to follow up specifically with Mr. Lynch, if we could just kind of follow up on something really quick in regards to access and opportunities to work in collaboration with some of the colleges and the universities, and maybe private partners, going off of what Lorena talked about earlier. What is the city doing to solidify those partnerships and take advantage of not take advantage, but create opportunities to work in partnership with universities and others?
Currently, I'm not sure, Councillor. I know a few years ago there was an effort to make sort of an educational partnership come to life. The different universities have different needs. We have worked closely with Bunker Hill, Roxbury Community College, and the Urban College.
Yeah, no, I'm talking more specifically. Well, those are great, but I'm really looking to see. I'm looking at BU. I'm looking at Northeastern. I'm looking at Suffolk. I'm looking at universities that exist in our city that can help support lower income communities or other, colleges in the city. Are there opportunities to tap into those big ticket items to
I don't know if there are opportunities. There's certainly a willingness. I don't know if that helps, but I think you might understand what I mean by that.
That means I'm gonna have to go fight somebody.
I'll
Lynch.
join you. I'll join you if you'd like.
Okay. Okay, Code. I'm good for that. It's just I'm just thinking about like ways that we can really solidify these partnerships and also the private sector too. I'm thinking of Fidelity. I'm thinking of John Hancock. I'm thinking about those folks who are doing business in the city of Boston that through their social responsibility platform or corporate responsibility platform, there is an opportunity for us to really build upon that in ways that are far more meaningful than just opening up their doors sporadically for events and things of that nature. So I'll just plant that seed, Mr. Lynch, and hopefully you can go out there and tear down the systems and make it all happen. But I believe there is an opportunity there to hold them accountable
Understood.
to that process. And then I just kind of really want to talk a little bit more about parents who don't speak English that are having a hard time on how to use technology to help their children learn in class. I know that for me, as an English language learner, as you know, someone who grew up with a mom who didn't speak English, or she didn't even, my mom even struggled learning how to read and write, and even in her native language. So I think that when we talk about education and we talk about outreach, I think that the city, I would really look to the city to really look at how can we be far more intentional about that communication, whether it be through the use of videos, visuals, because we're making a lot of assumptions that people know how to read and write in their native language or even in English for that matter. So I just think it's really important for us when we think about language access to also really think about what communication looks like. So I'm just curious, Lorena, if you could just talk a little bit about what pathways to engagement have you seen created so far, and how can the city help to improve that to better educate non-English speakers about accessing technology? Any ideas or recommendations that you'd like to share?
Yes,
Sure,
thank you.
certainly.
Oh, sorry.
Lorena, I'd be happy to have you take it. Thank you.
And then you, Lynch. So go ahead.
So, you know, through our work, when we were engaging with families, we were really trying to meet them where they were. So looking for areas that they were already congregating virtually, right? So what news platforms are being utilized? How was Facebook Live being utilized? And then being able to provide the information in that language. So one of the things that we did was we started a weekly Facebook Live segment in partnership with El Mundo Boston, which reaches obviously residents here of the city, but outside and in greater Boston as well, and just sharing resources. So what information was new for that week, because things were changing fairly consistently, and sharing resources with phone numbers and names of folks that they could engage with in their native language in Spanish. Additionally, I think schools, I'm incredibly lucky, and I recognize that. My son goes to the Hurley School, which is a dual language school. Part of their DNA is to completely have all of information coming out in English and Spanish. Unfortunately, I can't say the same is the practices for all of Boston Public Schools. Part of it is because of their own human capital. At my son's school, the majority of folks are bilingual. The majority of the teachers are a significant population of Latinx educators who are part of that school community. That's not necessarily the case for all schools in Boston Public Schools. And so I think that there's a diversity issue across just the district, as well as just in general government that we need to look at. But my son's school was putting out videos from the beginning that you could look at on your cell phone and then follow along to be able to engage in Clever or in whatever platform was being utilized so that students could log in. That I know that was not a common practice for all schools. And so there are incredible bright spots in our district, and we need to highlight them, and then we need to amplify them and make sure that they're being used at scale, and not every school or every community is reinventing the wheel.
Thank you for that. Mr. Lynch, you now have the floor. Or if you want
Thank you, Councilor. I was only going to mention, and David could add some of this in terms of the city's digital platform, and Dan Noyes as well with some of the partners in Tech Goes Home. But we learned a little bit from an organization that the city does partner with, that is English for New Bostonians. And they have been, how do I put this? They are facing a unique challenge because so much of the training requires an in-person introduction to technology. And we're not able to do that now. And I believe that EMB is exploring kind of like a liaison or an ambassador type role for their trainers to introduce themselves to new participants in, say, ESOL classes, for an example, and to try to connect them online. And that's one of the biggest challenges I think that folks are facing right now. You can mail a Chromebook to someone's home, and you can mail a cable modem in order for them to set up Wi-Fi, but someone has to walk them through it. And in this distance socialing sort of time frame, that's one of the biggest challenges. I see everybody head nodding right now. That's the biggest challenge everybody's facing right now. Not quite sure how to proceed with this.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to have one more question. One more. I think I do have time for one more. And this is going to Akeem Jackson. I'm just curious. Can you just talk a little bit about how has the city reached out to help with some of the issues that you identified, especially during COVID? How do you see our role as City Council to help improve the internet access for your schools, for your school, and other schools across the city? What recommendations would you have for us?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I think BPS, we've worked very closely with Mark Racine at BPS to really access both the technology as well as the internet resources. I think we're in a unique spot where we started a little bit earlier. Our Boston school started September 1st. And so we took a lot of onus on our own to really get kickstarted just as things were kind of getting underway. I would say one thing that kind of that we highlighted as we were kind of searching out sort of like the citywide access is really thinking about those wicked free hotspots. For some of our students, thinking about sort of different learning styles, even having the internet access in the home doesn't cater to their need to potentially move around. Some students have IEPs where they can't sit in one space for the entire day, and they need different settings, whether it's, in this context, going outside, going down the street, to really create sort of creative opportunities within that. And so I think as we think about the wicked free hotspots, I think that's one area, if we're able to expand them. Definitely many of our neighborhoods are sort of spaces that are left out. I think another thing, as we think, so like right now we're covering the cost, but I think sustainability wise, we're fundraising and we're doing, yep.
Wait, you're covering the cost?
Well, right now we've covered the cost, not because BPS hasn't been there, because again, we started a little bit earlier. And just to be honest, right now, what's going on in the world, we really wanted to take a stance and show our families like, hey, we're investing in you. First and foremost, yes, we have the support from BPS, and they're doing great on their end, given the circumstances. But we really wanted to take a stance for our families, at least, initially. But sustainability-wise, we're raising, a lot of money against our budget, with already, having some other things that we're raising money for. And I think sustainability-wise, it would be great to have, kind of transition more into the city's or BPS's plan. Moving forward. But right now, yes, we have been owning that, not because BPS hasn't been there, we just took that initiative. We started September 1st, so it was a little bit ahead of the curve before BPS actually had that in place as well.
Great, thank you. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Tech Goes Home. A lot of the families that I work with have gone through your program. Some right now have gone through the program and now they're the facilitators of your program, doing it in their native language. So I just think that's great to see that. And it's a model that definitely needs to continue to grow and expand and here for all of it. So thank you for your hard work that goes home in that space. We really do appreciate and see you doing the hard work.
Can I just add one sentence here, Council Flynn, I'm sorry. BNN is continuously doing PSAs for all the organizations that people are talking about. We send out a call for them and get none back. So if you people have PSAs you need to get aired, or I've got 2 television stations and a radio station that run stuff like that all day. So to say that that there is another resource here, Boston Neighborhood Network, and I wish you'd use it. It'd be great.
I'll be there, Glenn. I'll go there and record a PSA tomorrow.
That's good. That's good information to know. Thank you, Glenn, for giving us an update on that. That's important. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, this is a great panel, and I'm excited to ask each of them a question. Particularly excited to see President and Dr. Edinger on. Commend her for the great work she's doing over at Bunker Hill Community College. I heard her opening testimony that she has 16,000 students. That's just tremendous, and I can only imagine some of the issues that have popped up due to COVID. So a couple quick questions for President and Dr. Edinger, and that's that. Are you seeing any changes in enrollment as a result of COVID? And do you have any concerns that enrollment will decline as a result of the sort of digital divide? And would that also potentially be the trend across the board for higher education?
We did see, Counselor, enrollment drop for the fall. Not the summer for some reason, but the summer has a different constituents. I think a lot of the students coming back from four-year colleges were enrolling with us to do courses in the summer to transfer back to their four-year. But our base population did drop. We were expecting previous to COVID about a 6% decline because of the decline of the high school population. But it turned out it was double that for the fall. And we do believe that it is because, yeah, it is, and we're hoping that it's temporary, that it will come back up again. The lack of digital connectivity, I think, has a lot of downhill implications. Because the college has been acting like a social hub for our students, particularly students from communities of color and communities of high poverty. They don't have the computers at home. They don't have all of the connections that they need. So we became basically their hub, right? They came here for everything: the food pantry, the computers, the connections, the counseling, and everything else. So when we shut down the middle of March, we basically disconnected half of our communities. And because of the lack of digital equipment and the lack of broadband, and the lack of, in some cases, deep literacy, their ability to connect back up to the college was slow. And I don't think that we have caught up to it, just by the fact that, well, also they're taking care of kids, right? They're shepherding kids at home and they're trying to do their own homework. So the impact has been multiple. But if I were to find one lever that would make a lot of this better, is stronger broadband and better access. To access food, if they couldn't get to their food pantry in their community, we actually have them put orders via their smartphone or their computers into our food pantry so that we can deliver to them. So those are the kind of connectivity, or they can get to mental health counseling with our college counselor via that broadband and digital access. So when those things are gone, basically you don't have a sense of belonging. Right, I hate to get fuzzy and warm and fuzzy on you, but that really is what it is. They don't have an online community. Like they,
and you have a front row seat for it. Just obviously the demographic of your student population, plus a lot of them are parents of Boston Public School students, or they're coming right from the Boston Public Schools. So you sort of see what I see as an at-large counselor. So it's exciting to get your input.
Right, we're a microcosm, really, of the city.
Yes.
A quarter Black, a quarter white, quarter Latinx, 15% Asian.
Yep.
We're
You truly are. And Doctor, what efforts have been taken to? So I know you had mentioned you distributed about 700 laptops, and primarily, obviously, for some of your faculty, staff, as well as students. And what role? I often say Boston's an opportunity-rich and a resource-rich city. What efforts are either underway or can be put in place, particularly in our philanthropic circles and our broader based partners, to help sort of in this sort of the digital divide and the broadband piece that you're talking about? Is there anything else that we should, as members of the Boston City Council, advocating on behalf of your students and other students of higher education?
I love the idea of going to my four-year colleagues who are in much better financial shape and try to figure out. I think it was Councilor Mejia who had suggested that. I'll go with you. It is the philanthropic community has been very good. Our foundation has been excellent, and I know that the Boston Foundation has been doing a bit of work, but it's the family foundations who've been really coming up with a lot of the funds for us to get students those hotspots. I think we need to be much more, in some ways, cohesive in the way we plan. I did not know that Tech Goes Home was a thing, right? I did not know that the city had a deal going with Comcast that would allow for a much easier access or distribution of those resources. I think it would be worth our while to, as I said before, to do a little landscape analysis to see what resources are coming out of where, and then try to close the gap in a more, I would say, at least on my part, a more orderly way for, I mean, we can use the city as the core, but there is the rest of us who's working on the parameters. And that kind of connection, I think, would help a great deal. I would love to see a commission on this to focus on it so that we can draw it in. And the other thing also is the role of Gateway City that's in the greater Boston area. I know it doesn't fall into the budget, parameters of the city, but there is such interactions between, let's say, Boston and Chelsea. The lack of connection in one part affects the health of the other part. So I don't know how to do it, but somehow our cities, our sister cities on the edges, has a huge amount of effect on how healthy we are in the center.
Very good. Thank you very much, President Edinger. And to Director Lopera, quick question. Obviously, as you know, I was proud to sign on to the letter that you had sent over to DESE. I wanted to, that your organization, I should say, authored. What are the biggest barriers you've identified for our Latino community across the city?
Yes, thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty, and thank you for several of you have joined in on this effort with our letter to DESE and other stakeholders. So I think a couple of the barriers have been mentioned. Basic needs, right? So one of the pieces that came out of our survey recently was that 52% of families were concerned about income as well as access to food. So an additional 22. So in total, 74% are worried about whether they're going to have enough money to put food on the table or stay in their homes. And how that's related to digital equity is and access is everything is really kind of accessed at this point virtually. And so folks are concerned about being able to meet these basic needs, but they also don't really have resources to be able to find support. So we talked about the isolation that families are experiencing. And in the Latino community, they're isolated because they don't have their hubs. As Dr. Edinger mentioned, folks are missing just their communities and their support systems. When the Latino community, it is folded and multiplied because it's compounded in that folks also don't have access to information in their language. At least it's not readily available, and it's not available when other information goes out, which causes a lot of confusion in the non-English speaking communities. And so I would say that all of these pieces are big issues in the Latino community, and all of it, the common thread in all of that is tech access and digital connectivity.
Thank you, Director. And then just my last two questions to Director Jackson of Up Academy and for the great work that Up Academy is doing. I was curious to see what are the common themes and difficulties for our families at Up Academy with they're facing. And then to Deborah, could you just talk briefly about the Digital Equity $35,000 grant that helped create the technology audiovisual college course in partnership with Ben Franklin? So those are my last two questions, and I'll listen carefully. Thank you all to this panel.
All right. Well, in Boston, we serve over 2,000 students and families. And I would say, first and foremost, we identified over 250 families that had either spotty or no internet access. So I think just direct access to the internet is one. And as we've engaged in the partnership with Comcast Internet Essentials, one thing we've known is just that the process for some families is just very involved, whether it involves information that they don't have or they're not able to provide, or just the setup process. And so a couple of things that we've done, I think one is, we've created a guide that kind of basically distills down all, because Comcast Internet Essentials comes with a few different sort of guides for different aspects, whether it's the setup or just the use. And so we've distilled that down into one guide that's been translated in in Spanish, Cape Verdean Creole, Vietnamese, all the languages that our families speak. And this guide is literally a step-by-step guide from how to sign up to how to set up the device once they get it. Another thing that we've done is we've set up action teams at our schools, multilingual action teams. So if a family calls in Spanish or Vietnamese and they need actual like walkthrough setup, we try to sort of take that front line of defense to support before it gets to Comcast Internet Essentials. And so I would say those are the two things, is really just, again, baseline access, whether it's spotty or no access, and then also just helping families through the very involved process to set up.
Thank you, Director Jackson. And Deborah?
Yes, I'd like to thank the City of Boston. CSTO received the Digital Equity grant that allowed us, one, to bring more youth into our program, and also to partner with Ben Franklin Institute of Technology to provide audio visual training for our youth, where they would also receive college credit. And then from the training that they learned at BFIT, the students were prepared to set up presentations for different nonprofits that used our community room for the different types of training sessions that they offered. So that was a big help for our students, which also helped them, get to the next level in their computer science classes.
Thank you, Deborah. Next up is Councilor Bok, Kenzie Bok.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn, and thanks to everyone on the second panel. I think it's I was thinking while you all were speaking just about how much work there is for that kind of human support around these technological systems, and how much it has to be human and community based. And you guys are all exemplars of this. I had the opportunity to work with Debbie Bacchus again when I was at the VHA, and know her work well, but it's great to virtually meet you all and hear from you. I think it really underscored for me sort of what we were talking about with the first panel, and obviously President Edinger brought this up, but just the fact that even if we solved the cost piece of this, the sort of cost and availability, we would still have these issues around language access, around support for seniors, we would have an enormous tech support ecosystem to build for equitable access, even if we had the utility piece solved. But to have each of your organizations also trying to solve the basic utility piece, and then, pouring money in a way that makes a ton of sense right now, but isn't necessarily, financially feasible for your organizations in the long term. It just circles back to me, and I'm taking advantage of the fact that David is still on the call. It emphasizes the fact that, to me, the amount of money that we as a city would have to spend in the next 10 years to launch a municipal broadband service would be well worth it in the long run, because I don't see a world in which we're going backwards and the internet is becoming less of a public utility. And I think that President Edinger also pointed out the sort of commercial competitiveness issue. I know one thing, a strange thing we've seen in this work from home moment is that you've got a bunch of rural broadband programs that have created a public broadband option that have given people really fast internet in small towns across America. And granted, the rural areas, like in bulk, is less well served than the cities, but you've now got these towns where if somebody's trying to trade on Wall Street or do something, it's as competitive, and frankly more competitive from lots of parts of those places to be doing that work from home there than from the city. And I just think we're always going to run up against the issue of are there going to be Bostonians in 10 years who just can't access the internet? We don't accept there being Bostonians who can't access water. And I don't know. This whole conversation has really emphasized for me the need for a phase shift here. So I guess that's more of a point than a question to do it. I did have a question I did want to ask about, building on Lorena's point about mesh networks, just whether, and my understanding of that is that's when you've got an existing Wi-Fi network and you build out little hubs. It's like when somebody has, if you've got a home and you've got multiple routers that are all running one system, like, you have my understanding, is this right, Lorena, that would be the kind of thing we might do with, like, if a BU is providing a big Wi-Fi network for its folks, we would say, hey, well, what about providing it to this adjacent housing? And could we build off of the network? Is that the sort of thing you were picturing that Councilor Mejia was asking about?
Yes, so I am not a tech expert, but I have been reading up on what are different possibilities and also trying to be innovative. And so the idea is that mesh networks would extend your ability to have access at different points without reducing the capacity or the capability. And so my point is, it's the same as what we're thinking with wicked Wi-Fi, right? So we can extend wicked Wi-Fi, for example, on city buildings. So what is stopping us from looking at partnering with universities who already create their networks, who have their own little, let's say, internet bubble, and how do we encompass our residents as part of that? I think especially now when not all students are on campus, right? And especially knowing that we have so many campuses within our city limits who can engage in helping to bring a needed resource, an immediate needed resource for our community.
Yeah, so I guess then I would just, I guess I'd ask again Councilor Mejia's question, but sort of with that particular focus for David and for Mike, if he's still on. Oh yes, I see you. Just like whether that aspect of mesh networks, which obviously that's an above surface, extending something. It's not the same kind of infrastructure challenge that laying fiber optic cable is. Whether we've had any conversations with private entities, whether universities or other, about that type of thing, and if so, to what degree?
And I'll start it off and I'll kick it over to Mike. As far as I know, we have not. There are pros and cons to going to a fully mesh network. A lot of it has to do with handing off of the traffic from one of those bubbles to another bubble, and then a lot of them are centered around privacy concerns as you're transmitting all that information, traversing all of these different networks. So it's just it's a technology challenge that would need to be solved. It's something that's definitely that we could work on with a public-private partnership and explore what that would look like. But I have not, since my time here in the city, I've not had any conversations with like a Suffolk University or a private organization to fully mesh their network into our broadband and our dark fiber network throughout the city. I'll pass it over to Mike to see if he can kind of add on to that. Mike, you're on mute.
Sorry, that's not showing up as bright red. Missed it. Thanks for bringing up, Councilor. Like stated, mesh network. If I could, let me handle it with quick 3 anecdotes. One, the team who are our network managers absolutely freak out when we ask them to do wireless connectivity. It is complicated and it is high maintenance. It's a challenge, and things happen. If it snows, it doesn't work. If there's a high wind, it moves the antenna and somebody's going to run up on the roof and change it. Now take the end user, the person in the apartment. We're talking about reaching people who are, if not Luddites, they're naive to certain technologies. And there's a tremendous challenge to introducing to them. It requires a measure of technical sophistication, and they don't usually have it. And then my last one is we have 2 wireless providers in Boston who work well, I think, but they treat different constituencies. There's Starry, new company, kind of high tech, has a fairly affordable broadband service, but it's expensive. But it's also, as an engineer would say, it's elegant. It just works. but they're taking care of making that work, and you have to buy some rather expensive equipment to make it succeed. The other is NetBlazer. NetBlazer is more of a homegrown, community-based provider in Boston. Great company, run by a couple of great folks, but it's challenging for people. They have done work just outside of Dudley Square. They've done work in Madison Park Village. They're all over the city, but it's intensive work to make sure that the disenfranchised who are connected have the right tools in place. Do they have the router? Do they know how to connect it to their Chromebook or their tablet or their hotspot? Is there inside wire? If it's a large building, the wireless is just to the roof. Someone has to make sure that the connections within the building give them a drop in their apartments. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying, wow, there's a lot to it.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, thanks. I think there's still ways you could sort of add it around the margin for some of our cases. Mr. Chairman, can I ask you a really quick, really simple question?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. I've had constituents reach out and ask specifically if I'm in an area where there is only one provider. This is of, the cable, like a cable-based provider. Is there any way to get another? And I guess I'm just curious, do we, besides what we talked about with new developments, proactively making sure they're going to have multiple folks come in, does the city have any tools to force the introduction of a competitor in the parts of the city where we don't see one?
Well, Council Block, I was planning on, after this meeting, is having a working session on this issue, but focusing mostly on the providers, letting the providers come in, explain to us what they're doing, and giving us an opportunity to question them and asking them specifically of different neighborhoods and different groups that they're able to reach or not able to reach. So there's more information I would like to get from the providers, but I would like to do that in a working session, but sooner rather than later, hopefully in the next 30 or 40 days, I'm going to try to do that.
Great. Thanks, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Council Block. And the last person I have for my colleagues is City Councilor Campbell, Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I had a hard stop like 15 minutes ago, but I wanted to literally thank this panel in particular. Obviously you guys are on the ground in the community doing the work. I know many of you and appreciate the work you guys are doing with respect to our families. So I wanted to just say thank you. I also, and this is less questions, Councilor Flynn, because I have to jump, but more follow-up. I am, that landscape study that Pam was talking about, there are so many resources out there, but we often can't find them. I think it's so critically important. So anything I can do to support that effort, and the regional approach, it's also critically important. I think that's true for every issue. I used to work at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, who I'm sure would want to play a role in this. I mean, their council or their coverage area is 101 municipalities in Massachusetts. And I'm sure they've done some work in this regard. So it might be good to bring them to the follow-up working session. And if there is a commission that we look to form with respect to this issue, happy to be a part of that as well. And then, I know Deborah was talking about BFIT. I was just talking to Aisha actually recently with the work they're doing. There's just so many folks on the ground who are doing incredible work. The guides that Keem talked about, just really appreciate the work you guys are doing. I apologize that I have to jump, but thank you so much, Councilor Flynn and the makers for this. We'll continue to do my part in closing the gap. And thank you to all of you. I did not want to jump without saying a big thank you to the work you guys do every single day to meet the short-term needs of our families. So thank you, and everyone stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. We do have some public testimony. There are two people in the on the computer that maybe they do want to testify, but could you raise your blue hand if you are interested in testifying? Kerry, I can't see if anyone has raised their hand. Are you able to tell me if they have raised their hand?
And Mr. Chair, we have Emiliano who raised his hand and he's now in the session to testify.
Miliano?
Yes, good morning.
Okay. How are you,
Can you hear
Miliano?
me? I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
What's on your mind?
Good afternoon. My name is Emiliano Falcomorano. I'm the Policy Counsel for the Technology for Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts. And on behalf of the ACLU and our more than 10,000 members and supporters in the city of Boston, I submit this public comment to assist you in the discussion about resources and strategies for internet access and digital equity in the city. It was very interesting for me to hear all the testimonies from the city and from the community advocates. So what we want to talk today is about the fact that digital equity is more important than ever. In light of a pandemic that forces people to stay home, to take care of themselves, being connected to the internet has become a primary necessity. People need to have cheap, fast, and reliable internet access to work and access essential services like healthcare and education. Because of this, we think that the city of Boston must not only ensure that every resident has equal access to the internet, but also provide resources to assist families who need help in accessing digital services. Given the time constraints in this hearing, we would like to focus on only two issues. First, the city must ensure that every student in Boston public schools have equitable access to technological tools for purposes of remote learning. And second, we would like the city to seriously consider the provision of municipal broadband services for all its residents. As to the digital equity in Boston public schools, the importance of adequate technological tools in the schools is paramount. As we heard today, computers and technology offer an approach to help our students overcome the closure of their schools. Still, remote learning is not a sufficient remedy unless all students have access to the tools they need to participate fully and equally. Such equal access does not presently exist, and efforts to provide it have been so far insufficient. The technological tools all students must receive for remote learning include: first, computers and tablets with built-in or external webcams and microphones; internet access that is fast enough for learning via remote video meetings; hardware and related capabilities that are needed for high-speed internet access; printers, including ink; free access to remote learning and communication platforms and applications; assistive technology, including hardware such as screen readers; and software and websites that comply with Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0 levels AA accessibility standards, so students with disabilities can fully participate in remote learning. It's very important that all these issues have appropriate privacy protections that protect students and their families' personal information and prevent unwarranted sharing of information with entities outside the school districts. And for all of the above, provide plain language, English written, and native language, which is the content in the parents' and the guardians' native language materials, so families can understand and use the remote learning technology tools provided by schools and their education partners. Moreover, the city of Boston should call on computer hardware, software, ISP, EdTech, private companies to help provide the above listed technologies to schools for free or on loan so that they can be distributed to students in need. In the case of services like internet access, those can and should be provided directly to students for free until the COVID-19 crisis subsides. And the city, through its agencies, must coordinate the distribution of physical technology to ensure the students who need the devices receive them. The city of Boston should start providing...
Take one more minute. Take one more minute.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
take
back
one
in-
more minute. Okay.
Thank you. So back in 2016, the city of Boston partnered with Verizon to expand its fiber optic network to offer speeded broadband internet service to the entire city. However, some areas of the city are still currently underserved in terms of internet access. For example, according to data from the US Census Bureau, in some parts of Boston, a staggering figure of 30.67% of residents don't have broadband services. And the most likely reason for this is that they can't afford it. The city of Boston has a historic opportunity to fill this gap and implement a municipal broadband service that provides a cheap, fast, reliable, and universally accessible connection to all those who cannot afford a private provider. Across the country, there are more than 330 municipal broadband providers. A review that compared states with obstacles that prevent the establishment of municipal networks against states without those same restrictions show that the latter enjoy higher access to low-priced broadband plans on average. This means that municipal broadband services result in a more affordable and accessible market. Here in Massachusetts, since 2016, more than a dozen rural communities have gained high-speed internet thanks to municipal broadband, and they were all very successful. The pandemic accelerated a digital process that was already happening. From shopping to education, from working remotely to telemedicine, the use of online tools like videoconferencing is becoming more and more ubiquitous.
Thank
And
you.
the benefits, oh, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I have one more, and I'm just trying to get the other person in before 1:30. We have a
Thank
hard
you.
stop at 1:30. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more person that's looking to testify.
Yes, hi, hello. My name is Lavette Coney, and I'm the president of Mount Pleasant Forest and Vine Neighborhood Association. I quickly just want to say that we've always had problems with access to city sponsored meetings. One, because many are being held on one day, and some of them are held at hours and times that are not conducive to people who work during the day. I would like to advocate times that would do that and allow for more participation from many people, which would be on the weekends and evenings, but also to access meetings, we would need it to be put on social media and put on different platforms so that it's like the most broad group of people will be able to access this information, like this recording right now, this recording today too. How and where will it be housed so that people can, and I can also pass it on to residents.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to make sure that my staff, but also central staff, coordinates the video of this hearing. So at some time over the next couple of days, central staff will put it out on the on social media. So we'll try to send it out to a large group of people as well to make it as accessible to everyone as we can. And having said that, again, I want to say thank you to the panelists for being here. I want to say thank you for the team from Mayor Walsh's office, and especially for the community activists that are doing so much work in our neighborhoods, making sure that those most in need have access to the internet and are able to communicate with each other in this critical time, this critical period. And that's what our job is, and city government is trying to be there for the people most in need. So I want to say thank you to everybody for doing an outstanding job, and looking forward to the working session that I will make sure that we include you if you want to listen and join us as well. Having said that, I want to thank central staff for excellent work today. And Kerry is on the line. I want to say thank you to all my city council colleagues as well for being here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Gabble, you got to gabble us.